Frankenstein, Revisions and Legacies. Only 5 years after its publication, in 1823, the story of Frankenstein was on the London stage. It was adapted multiple times during the 1820s, but the earliest version was by Richard Sheridan Peake. He entitled it Presumption, or The Fate of Frankenstein. Even in its title, Peake is making an interpretation of the text. Victor Frankenstein's crime is not his failure to consider the full ramifications of his experiments or his abandonment of his creature, but presuming to play God and become a creator of human life. The play was very freely adapted. Among many other changes, it introduces a lab assistant for Frankenstein called Fritz, who is played for comic effect. It takes away the creature's voice so that we don't understand his motives or see his full humanity. And it changes the ending. In the end of Presumption, Victor goes into the mountains to hunt down the monster which has killed his brother William. But when he fires his gun, he triggers an avalanche, which kills both creature and creator. Apparently, the stage effects were astonishing. Mary Shelley went to see this play and apparently enjoyed it. And it may have had some influence on her because when she came to revise the novel for a second edition published in 1831, here's the title page, she condemns more strongly Victor Frankenstein's presumption, making that the central lesson of the novel in a way it just isn't in the earlier work. And she emphasizes the power of fate over human life. The 1831 edition is more conservative in other ways as well. She takes out the critique of the justice system and most of the other political content of the novel. She mutes the suggestion of incest in the relationship between Victor and Elizabeth by making them biologically unrelated, no longer cousins, right? Probably to escape the scandalous associations with Byron. And she changes the character of Elizabeth herself. In 1818, although Elizabeth led a domestic life, she was politically aware, intellectually independent, able to stand up to Victor. In 1831, she is disappointingly saintly and resigned and silent, even in the face of Justine's execution. Perhaps Mary Shelley, now not a daring girl living with a radical poet, but a widow raising a son on her own, felt she needed to retreat from her earlier political radicalism in order to maintain social respectability. Perhaps the experience of her life genuinely changed her mind about some things. In any case, though the changes in the text are not huge, the meanings of Frankenstein in the second edition are significantly altered. The meanings, of course, change again when film adaptations are made in the 20th century. This is Boris Karloff as the creature in the 1931 Frankenstein, directed by James Whale, sort of the iconic Frankenstein. And here's Robert De Niro playing the creature in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, a 1994 adaptation directed by Kenneth Branagh. They change again when comic book writers adopt the creature as a villain. Here's a Marvel Comics cover, and this was not the only series which featured the creature, or, in their words, the monster, or when it is made into a ballet, as it was last year, a ballet by Liam Scarlett. For me, though, nothing has the same power as the original novel, for a variety of reasons. Frankenstein is unique, first, because it is interesting as literature. This sets it apart from some other texts that have launched modern myths. Superman, Tarzan, these are great myths, not very good literature. But Frankenstein holds literary interest as well as cultural interest. It has a complex and interesting literary form. You have the nested narratives. You have the use of the epistolary form and first person. You have multiple perspectives. You have the outsider Walton, then Victor Frankenstein, and then the creature. Frankenstein also places itself in the great Western literary tradition. It's in dialogue with Prometheus, with Greek tragedy, with the historian Plutarch, with Milton's Paradise Lost, and with Goethe's Young Werther. Imaginative, romantic descriptions of sublime settings make for a terrifying tale. You also have complex, nuanced characters, at least in the male characters, not a battle between good and evil characters, but the complicated mixture of good and bad motives and actions that we find in real life. While it's related to the Gothic novel, it is really sui generis, its own genre. It's also interesting as an artifact of its time. Although she was an onlooker more than a participant, Mary Shelley was at the center of contemporary literary culture, living with two of the great romantic poets, sharing their lives, their ideas, their creative processes. Romantic themes, human potential, solitude, the love of nature, the sublime, pervade the text, and it can be read in conjunction with romantic poetry. In addition, these romantic writers were vitally interested in science, studying new ideas about electricity, reading about galvanism, and attending scientific demonstrations, hungry for the newest knowledge, the most original scientific ideas. So Mary Shelley was also familiar with the most up-to-date scientific culture of her day. It is also interesting philosophically. Mary Shelley was drawing on the philosophers of the English Enlightenment and of Romanticism, especially Locke and Rousseau, as she wrote her story of the creature's psychological and moral development. But the novel continues to challenge us with philosophical questions. What does it mean to be human? What is the origin of human evil? What are our responsibilities with regard to other people, our children, our communities? What are the responsibilities of scientists with regard to their discoveries? How should we treat outsiders in our societies? It is also interesting as science fiction. It inaugurates a new genre that will become increasingly important in the century to come. So seeing it at its beginnings, at its origin, is particularly interesting. And finally, it is open to multiple interpretations. Literary critics have identified the creature with almost every group of the culturally dispossessed, those without cultural power. Marxist critics have seen the creature as representing the exploited workers under industrial capitalism, or the French revolutionary forces overthrowing the monarchy. Feminist critics have sometimes seen the creature as representing women's subordinate status, connecting the novel with Mary Wollstonecraft's critique of women's position. More recently, critics have seen the creature as representing colonized people struggling to find their voices in the dominant society. The creature is open to multiple interpretations, which suggests that he represents something more profound than any of the individual situations he is identified with. He represents something deep in the human experience.